Right, welcome everyone. We are really very happy and pleased to have the Borough Common Party here. I'm one of the few people who can pronounce it. I'm not a your name. We speak the same language. So yeah, he is a AAAI fellow and he is also a fellow of AIS and also ACM. So he is a very well-established person. He has been working in planning, he's a leader of this area for a long time. And he was also president of AAAI and among other things, among other administrative roles. So I'm very eager to listen to his talk about his work involved with that. Thank you. Welcome.
Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you all for coming to the talk. Let me start, and also thanks for the invitation. Let me start by addressing the elephant in the room, especially for those of you who are on the Zoom. You are thinking, what's wrong with your rock? Why do you have to come all the way? Increasing the carbon footprint. You can't be also on Zoom. Yes, I could have considered that, but there are several reasons. First of all, I know lots of friends here in Alan and Prasad and foundation. In fact, it turns out that 34 years back, my very first job interview of any kind was at Oregon State University. Okay, and so it turns out I don't have too many memories of it, so I went back. I don't remove any dates. So I went back and looked at my email, and then. As you can see, it is 1989 May. Okay, so I was here on March 30th, 1989. And so I wrote a mail after that to the Guardian about my experience here. And there's a whole bunch of things I removed because I don't want to talk to people. But I do want to say that there was this pesky, what I thought was a grad student who was sitting in the front row and asking lots of questions. Grad students, it should be nice to other grad students. So somehow I dealt with these questions, and then I realized later on, to my consternation, that was Tom Dietrich. So if you have trouble dealing with Tom's questions, you think like me, think of him as a grad student. In many ways, I think he's still a grad student in the best sense of the word. He's learning lots of things, etc. So anyway, so that was my Oregon State story, and so I thought I'll check out. When I get a chance to go to Cowboys, I want to come here. And the other reason, of course, is look, in the last few months, years, actually people giving talks. Okay, it will be very soon. ChatGPT connects to Whisper and Stable Diffusion. That's it, right? And then we'll all just be having dinner somewhere. So I thought I might as well do my talk before that age, in an hour. Right? So talking about ChatGPT and everything getting done by ChatGPT, I did want to mention, even though it's not directly part of this talk, that the one thing, Prasad mentioned that I work in automated planning, and the one shibboleth for humanity is planning. It turns out ChatGPT sucks at planning. It makes, this was Nurip's foundation models. I get that term, by the way. Foundation models for reasoning. It turns out they're suck at it. It was obvious to anybody that if you're learning the distribution of something, you're not going to get instance level accuracy. So there's no reason to believe that actually plans will be correct by the ChatGPT. But many people, including some of you here, they are pretty darn sure ChatGPT will do it. They just try it. And so we actually showed that it gets a whopping 0.5% accuracy on Oxford that everybody wants to make fun of. Okay, it's like as commonsensical as you can get. It's 0.5% accuracy. The reason it's 0.5% accuracy is because it looks like a plan, but it just turns out it won't execute. There will be some preconditions missing and so on and so forth. This is the story of ChatGPT. You ask it, did Rao get a Turing award? First, he said, what the heck, what do you mean? And then if I ask again, did Rao get a Turing award? Yeah, he got it in 2004. And then there are some references showing that there's a word Rao and there's a word Turing in those files. Okay. So anyway, so planning actually is a still a shibboleth. It turns out that actually you can use ChatGPT to get heuristic guidance for planning. So as long as there's somebody who knows what is correct, you can get your ideas. Ideas don't have to be right. You just have to make sure that once you have a conjecture, you actually prove it. Okay, so when you do that sort of a thing, ChatGPT can still be quite useful. Actually, there was like a thing written by somebody that large language models can't plan, even if they can write fancy essays. So at least, my area, I don't know what the rest of your guys think. Yes, my area is safe for at least 2-3 weeks. Okay. So anyway, so I'm basically, in addition to that thing, I also want to kind of draw your attention to a couple of other things. I write a bunch of general audience articles on AI that might be of interest to people actually working in AI too. There are the Polanyi's Revenge, which sort of talks about this craze about converting all explicit knowledge tasks into tacit knowledge computations, as if that is somehow like an advance in civilization. I think it's a mistake, so you might want to look at that. The other thing that's actually quite useful is probably also to think of the fact that AI as a field is changing from engineering an artifact to have a function to see what the artifact that OpenAI already trained seems to do. Okay, so it's sort of become more like biology. It's sort of an research, natural science, and it has some interesting ramifications. That's a reasonable thing to do, but it's a very different kind of research. Many of you are going to be doing that sort of research, so you might want to look at that kind of a viewpoint that sort of change your mindset a bit. Anyway, and most of these, including the Grand Canyon flying to Portland, I think. Okay, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. My research background, the kind of thing that I want to talk about today to you, mostly is about this human AI interaction. I discovered humans late in life. I think Julie has discovered them very, very early in her life, but I humans late in life, and I thought it's kind of fun to have them around, and AI system should work with them as against just be happy on Mars with the spirit and robot. And so before that, I've mostly always been interested in single agent decision making. But then once humans are in the loop, it is multi-agent decision making with one of the agents being us, and with all the advantages and disadvantages of that. So we'll be looking at that, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so that the talk, before I go forward, I do want to mention that if you're thinking in terms of what is required for an AI system to work well with humans, okay? If you want to remember like a sound bite, I would say managing mental models. Stuff that you do very well. That's basically what goes under the word social intelligence. This person doesn't have social intelligence because they don't know how to read minds, they don't know how to read faces, and other stuff. Okay. So how many of you know, other than Julie, how many of you know Sally and Test? Okay, only one person. He already said he was a so he knows. But so let me tell you what Sally and Test is, because this is an engineering department, and humans and engineering don't mix well. So you may not have heard about Sally and Test. So this is a after late lunch quiz. So the red girl is Sally, and the blue girl is Anne. Sally comes in, puts a ball in the yellow box, and she goes out. And then Anne comes in, puts the ball into the gray box. He goes out. While this all fun stuff is going on, you're watching this. Now the question: when Sally comes in, where will she look for her ball? Okay, I hope you're not having trouble with this, because if not, I think Oregon state engineers have given more social intelligence problems than maybe Arizona state engineers. But in general, we take it for granted that belief that you have is different from the belief that other people have. In fact, when you realize that, it's when you know how to lie. Believe it or not, you didn't know how to lie when you were kids. So when my kid started telling his lies, I thought, man, this guy's brain is working. Social intelligence, he can actually realize this is not surprising. So there are like psychological studies showing that when kids come into this world, they think that they're Their body is connected to the rest of the universe. So they sort of part of the whole thing to the extent. I mean, not that anybody interviewed this case. But then they realize that they have a different body, but for a long time they will still think that their mental beliefs are the same as other people's beliefs. And if you believe that, to some extent, there's no point in lying. So in fact, Sally and test given to people kids below 3 years of age, actually people will say, yeah, we all know that the ball is the gray box, so I'm pretty sure Sally will fall into the gray box. And at 4, they will look at you saying, are you silly? Why are you wasting my time with these kind of things? Because they have figured out, that they're basically the mental modeling and the belief systems are different. So managing mental models is what is important. If the AI system is working with you, it's not about solidarity. If you ask an AI system, why do you make this decision? It should give an answer that makes sense to you, the aspect, not something that only makes sense to it. That becomes very important. So given that, the quick overview is about 2 parts. In the first part, I want to give you an idea of some of the work that we've done in the past several years, like maybe 4 or 5 years, on using mental models for explainable behavior in the context largely of explicit knowledge tasks. Explicit knowledge tasks where, so first of all, I'll make this point multiple times. So human knowledge can be classified into like explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge tasks. Explicit knowledge is the one where not only do you know how to do the task, but you know how you do it. So you can tell somebody else how to do it, not just by showing demonstrations. You can actually provide almost a verbal description. Tacit knowledge tasks are the things that we know how to do, but we have no idea how we do it. Vision, speaking, almost talking in stream of consciousness sentences. There are things that are tacit knowledge tasks. So if you want like an arbitrary delineation, you can think of tacit knowledge tasks can be done at a reflexive level at the system 1. And then the system 2 probably can actually do longer term projections on the explicit knowledge tasks. And so if you have domains where you have explicit knowledge, then essentially you still will need to provide explanations as to if the planner actually makes a decision. You still need to provide an explanation to the human if they ask, why did you not do this other decision? And so I'll talk to you about how we actually handle that. It turns out that the interesting thing again is in terms of models, the model of the robot has of the task, the model the human has of the task, the model that the human has of the robot's capabilities, that is MRH. That winds up being very important. Why? Because humans anthropomorphize box. They're not going to anthropomorphize robots, of course they're going to, right? So you are going to essentially take that into consideration. When people are surprised at you, it's because they expected you to do something different. Okay, if you do what people expect you to do, it's kumbaya. You never have to open your mouth and explain it. And so if the robots essentially have to understand the kind of model the humans have of MRH, so basically use that, and explainable interaction is the robot trying to take MR and MRH together in deciding its behavior. That's what we'll talk about. It turns out that we can differentiate in 2 pieces. One is explicable reasoning, where you say, look, you expect me to do this, I'll just do this. That way you don't have to worry. You don't won't be surprised. Okay. But oftentimes, and many of you have known, especially, that if doing what people expect you to do can be costly for you. When I'm very sure you have parents and parental issues, they expect you to do something, you say, I want to live my life, presumably because we think that's more optimal for you. So in general, dealing with people's expectations and being optimal with that might be actually highly optimal with respect to your own model, your own task of the task. That's basically being explicable. The other possibility is to say, look, I'll do what I want, and I'll provide an explanation to you that helps you change your MRH, your model of my capabilities slowly, so that you will start having the right expectations of it, so that we'll get back into the same level. So that's the first part, explicability, explanation. And then there's like a huge number of extensions that you can do from that general perspective. And I'll kind of mention some of them. There is a book that we wrote kind of summarizing that work. That's Explainable Human AI Interaction. And so that sort of, and then there's a bunch of papers. That's like last 4 or 5 years worth of work. And then more recently, in the last 1-2 years, I've been quite interested in what happens if, in fact, whether or not the task is explicit knowledge task, the model that the robot uses, the model that the AI system uses, is essentially inscrutable to the humans. You heard the word. If you can think of a word that has taken off in AI, the word inscrutable is here, right? Because people talk about inscrutable models and so on. So basically, you as well as the robot are actually working in the same domain. Let's say something like we talk about Montezuma's revenge, the Atari game, but the robot might be doing a pixel space reasoning. You are doing object level reasoning. You, the human. And so, if you are surprised at the robot's decision, you want an explanation for that in terms that you can understand, not in terms of pixels, but in terms of objects, in terms of actions and preconditions and effects. Now, typically, one idea is if the robot stops doing reasoning in the pixel space and starts doing reasoning in the same model that the humans have, this problem won't exist. But that would be the first one. But even there are all these model reconciliation. But I would argue that actually you can let your AI systems deal with whatever representations they are happy with. If you like pixel space, that's fine. But the price you pay for being with me in the human society is that when you talk to me, you give explanations in terms that I understand. That's the minimum thing we should do. Otherwise, we are masochists trying to create a future where we have no place, essentially. Okay, so if you want to be able to collaborate with machines, they provide explanations that make sense to you in terms of the shared vocabulary. And so the work that we've been doing actually is a blue sky paper in AAAI this year, plus a bunch of papers that were written about various pieces of this as to how post facto you would generate an explanation as needed, but in terms that humans will understand. To some extent, imagine if you're having different language, if you're having, I was for a long time a Telugu speaker like Prasad, and when I had to talk to English beings, I had to convert what they're saying into Telugu, make an answer, and then convert it back into English. At least they were human languages, they're in the same sort of a, manifold. These guys actually are not even in the same manifold, they're actually talking at the pixel level. But at the time of explanation, they have to provide a local symbolic approximation to their model so that they can provide an explanation. So I'll tell you how we do that, and that's basically the two parts of that. And in general, my sense is that there's nothing wrong with the AI systems using whatever representations make sense to them, as long as they can talk to you. Okay, and the talk involve either providing, using the vocabulary you and they'll understand, and educating over a period of time. So vocabulary may have to be expanded. So, for example, it's been said multiple times that the 37th move of AlphaGo. Okay, I don't know what Go is. I barely play chess. I don't know what Go is, but I'm told that 37th move in that fateful match of AlphaGo is inexplicable. Everybody is surprised. What exactly do you mean when people say they're surprised that such a move? It is vocal. Why did you not think about it? Because people didn't have a simple symbolic-ish explanation as to why that would be a right move to make. And since they didn't even have the vocabulary to describe the conditions under which such a move can be made. So in fact, in that kind of a scenario, actually there's work going on in other groups where you almost teach the humans the vocabulary, humans and machines together develop new vocabulary with respect to which you can again exchange symbolic. So that's the sort of the outline of the talk. So I'm going to start the first part. So let me start with the tale of three models. So if you have a single agent, essentially, I basically think in terms of some initial state specification, some goal state specification, action specification, and then first analysis, the plans. Okay. There are multiple representations that you can use. Again, I'm talking about explicit knowledge tasks. So you can actually use different kinds of knowledge representation mechanisms. I typically like PDL because there are actions, preconditions, and effects. I think everybody who thinks of actions tends to think my psychological models tend to think of actions as having preconditions and effects anyway. But most of what I'm saying actually can be expanded to, like, if you are into other kinds of representations, probabilistic representations, probabilistic stochastic action representations, God forbid, some atomic representations such as MDPs, you can still do them. We actually have papers showing that. But I'll act as if we have actions with preconditions and effects. The preconditions and effects have some symbolic units. Okay. So if you have a single agent, I don't know how they call it classical planning. So basically, you have a model, a world model of your task and what your goals are, and it's trying to figure out starting from the state. I'm looking for now for the deterministic setting because the other stuff like stochastic, etc., are extra bells and whistles. It doesn't change the points about explanation. And so it basically comes up with a sequence of actions that essentially will take it from the initial state to the goal state. Right? That would be a way to achieve its task. And then, of course, if its model is actually faithful to the world, then it executes it, they'll actually work. If not, then it has to replan, it has to change the model, etc. Okay. But the moment you put the human in the loop, it turns out that actually the humans have a model of the task. It's not necessary that the humans have exactly the same model of the task that the robot has, even for symbolic tasks. Okay, it's not necessary that the human that is working with the robot is the same human that gave the robot its explicit knowledge task model. So you could have end users who have a very different understanding of the task. So the humans might actually have a different model which have like different missing preconditions, extra effects compared to the robot's model. On top of it, they might actually have different goals because it's a collaborative setting. They have different constraints and different goals that they have. So left to just the human will solve the problem in a different way. Just the robot will solve it using MR. And the minimum that you want to do when the human is in the loop, obviously, is the robot should at least avoid running over humans. I mean, if you see some of these humanoid robots, that's like the biggest problem, essentially, right? So the minimum you do is try to figure out where the heck they are going so that you don't kill them. Okay. And if possible, try to also help. Okay. And that basically involves the robot estimating M of H, which is the human's model. When I say model, by the way, not just the actions, it's also the goals and the place, the initial state they're starting. That's a general view. So this is the stuff that you heard a lot about: plan recognition, action recognition, and these are all things where they're essentially looking at another agent's behavior to figure out what their goals are. And those are very useful if robots are working with humans. But it's like a first order problem. We have done a bunch of it. There's a large number of people who have worked in this area too. But so you could do it in intention recognition, you can do and then intention projection. So one of the other things, it's actually, as many of you have figured out, many people have figured out when Teslas and the automated cars came into existence, that when you stop at the stop sign and I'm trying to cross, I look at your eyes. Try to see, are you kind of a serial killer? I'm not. Okay, you look like a serial killer. I said, please, you right? And whereas if you have an autonomous car, it has no eyes, right? And so people are very worried. Let's see the next day, because what if I'm dead and my family gets like a big restitution? I'm not going to enjoy it. Okay, so in general, intention projection is very important. The reason they look at my eyes is because I'm projecting my intention. Yeah, you go. I'm not going to kill you. Okay, that the robot has to do too. So that's again part of handling at the level of not getting on each other's nerves. But the thing that I'm really interested in, that stuff is kind of understood. That's like the first order level. The thing that I'm really interested in is this MRH. As I said, humans anthropomorphize everything. The moment they have a robot, they will assume this must be the model that the robot is using. With respect to which, for the task, they will figure out, oh, this must be the plan it will use. And unfortunately, unless MRH is the same as MR, the optimal plan in MR is not going to be the same as the optimal plan in MRH. So then the humans are surprised. Okay, and why did you do this? At that point, basically, there are two issues. As I said, the robot can either conform to the human's expectations by essentially estimating MRH and then doing what MRH says rather than what its model says it should be doing. Okay, are doing what is closer to optimal in its model and providing an explanation. And the explanation, people talk about explanations all the time. And in fact, if you look at machine learning literature in explanation, apparently there are humans who ask everybody, each other, why do you think it's a dog? Why do you think this is a cat? I have never seen such humans. No human friend I have asked me, why do you think this is a dog? Okay, they do ask me, why did you come in person to give a talk? And there is sort of sequential decisions require explanations. You know, a snapshot or a picture, that sort of a thing. We don't actually, they use the word explanation when they mean debugging the damn system. This is not explanation for humans. Okay, you're just trying to debug the system. So whereas here we are talking about sequential decision, and then so the explanation that the robot gives is if only you change your model of my capabilities MRH this way, then you too would see that what I did is the optimal. You understand what I'm saying? So explanation is model reconciliation. When you're explaining to people, if they're surprised at all, they won't be surprised at all if that's what they expect. If they're surprised at all, it's because MRH is different from MR. And then you change it. So that's basically what we will do. One thing that I want to mention is unlike, of course, all models essentially are approximations of the reality. And so it turns out that even if in fact the plan is working in the model, it doesn't have to work in the real world. But on top of it, MRH and of course there's also the MHR, which I won't talk about. They both turn out to be essentially, they don't have those many requirements. In essence, you can think of them as expectations on the models MH and MR, and so they don't have to be executable per se. It's just that you want to make sure that the plan is consistent with what would have been optimal in the model. Okay, so the model differences with the humans in the loop, the robot's model may differ from the human expectations, as I said, and so if it differs, you will have, because the human expected an optimal plan in MRH, you are doing an optimal plan in MR. And so those are different plans normally. And so you first point would be inexplicable, the humans are surprised. And so the question is, the robot has two options. One is explicable planning, sacrifice optimality in its own model to be conformed to the human's model of capabilities. The other is plan explanations, resolve the perceived suboptimality by just revealing relevant model differences. The revealing relevant model differences is important because there is a degenerate, trivial way you can explain anything and explain anything you did to anybody. If they ask, why did you do it? Here is your brain. Take it, put on your brain, you'll understand why I did. You see what I'm saying? But in addition to the fact that giving brain involves sort of blood flowing all over the place, it's really too long an explanations unnecessarily large explanation. All you need to do is why you take this particular thing different. So you are trying to talk about how to change MRH in the minimal places in terms of, you have to add this precondition, you have to remove this array. Then you will see that the plan that I have is very optimal. You see what I'm saying? That's what we do. So let me give you an example. So think of this scenario where you are a human, outside the loop, essentially like in a safe place, a commander, and then the robot is in some physical location. Think of this as a toy search and rescue scenario. So in the beginning, they start with the map of the world. So both of them share the map. So if you're thinking about MH equal to MR at that time. Okay. And then basically when the robot is actually on the ground, so it's possible that it's a search and rescue scenario, there may be rubble, there may be some paths that are closed, some paths that are open. The shortest path that the human thinks the robot would do would assume that MR equal to this map. That is there, MRH would be essentially the original map. But the map has changed because the robot is actually on the ground, it has seen additional information. Okay, there's lots and lots of new things it has seen. But if there's a question as to why did you do a particular path, it needs to just give the pieces, the changes in the map that matter in explaining this particular plan. Okay, so that's what we'll see. So in this particular case, in the beginning, it turns out, yeah, it's working. So in the beginning, it turns out that it's supposed the shortest path was through this path. It turns out that there's a rubble we put like a fake obstacle. Okay. And the robot didn't want to get into trouble with us. It essentially made the path passable. Then I did exactly what you expected me to do. Okay, then I don't need to speak. Then I don't need to explain anything. You realize that now I'm lifting this, even lifting a fake obstacle requires muscles and all that stuff. In general, it's going to increase the cost of the plan. Essentially, it's no longer actually going through that particular path is no longer the best path for the robot at all. But it did because that's what you were expecting. Now, before you make fun of this robot, think of the possibility that since I talked about Grand Canyon, you decided that you will do rim to rim. And you told your friend to wait for you on the north rim. But then you went half the way and you're like coming back. And maybe you started from north rim, which is actually much less, much fewer people. So this guy is waiting on the south rim for you to come back. And he just went back to north rim. That's not going to work. Because you won't have any car. And for those of you who don't know, going from North Rim to South Rim on drive is 212 miles. Because a friend of mine actually booked a larger North Rim and thought at 5 o'clock he will see sunset on the South Rim and then just go to North Rim Lodge. So my point is sometimes it's important to be explicable. And then you take the hit to make your plan be what the humans expect, because there is no communication. If there's no communication, then this is basically the right way to do. Okay. But on the other hand, so now if you're doing this, what actually changes in terms of the planning problem? Originally, any planning problem is trying to find the optimal policy given your customers. Right? So that's what you have been doing. But now, not only am I minimizing this, but I'm also trying to get a plan that is as close to what you would expect given your MRH. If it's closer to what you expect, then suddenly your plan would be understandable, more understandable to the humans. So now it's a different optimization problem where you're actually trying to not just optimize your cost, but you're also trying to optimize the comprehension cost of the human by being as close to the human's plan as possible. So it's a different kind of thing. And it turns out that you can actually solve this problem without having, I'll talk about this again in past later, but you can solve this problem without having explicit representation of MRH. If you, for example, have expectation data of humans as to what sort of behaviors they seem to like on robots and what sort of behaviors they seem to surprise beforehand, you could use that to actually compute that distance, estimate that distance. And so you don't necessarily have to have MRH. So you can think of this as, even though it's model-based everything, it can be model-free. You can have model-free explanation. Okay, for the case of explanations, if you don't want to conform to the human's expectations, what you can do is you essentially say the epsilon changes that need to be made to the MRH. So you have an estimate of MRH that the human has. Upfront assume that you have the direct estimate of MRH. And then you say, if only you're missing this precondition for this action, you're missing this effect for this action. If you add those, you will realize that the plan you are expecting is not actually possible. You understand what I'm saying? So explanation then becomes a search in the space of models. So not in the, no, so in this particular case, this guy decided I'm not going to bother with making the plan possible, the path possible. I'm just going to take the second best path. But then I tell the human, communicate to them, saying that particular path is what. So at that point, then he compute what is going to be the next best path and then read there. You see what I'm saying? So that would be explanation. As I said, explanation involves search in the space of models. Plan involves search in the space of action sequences, policies. And explanation involves search in the space of models. Like I said, there is a degenerate solution, which is take my GUI brain, and then that's the full model. Okay, but full model oftentimes is extremely large. I think so, if you're doing anything useful. So you want to just provide the minimal changes that need to be done. It turns out there are some interesting technical issues. There is at least two different ways this notion of minimality can be actually made technically precise. One is what's called the MCB, and one is called the minimally monotonic explanation. That depends on whether in this what is looking like a bidirectional possible graph, are you starting from the humans model and changing. So when each of these arrows essentially involve adding a precondition, removing it. That's the search space. For my actions, that's the difference, right? And so you are saying, what are the maximum number of preconditions I need, minimum number of preconditions and effects changes have to come so that I'm in this orange part of the model. At that point, the robot's plan is already optimal. Except this reasoning is not done by the human, it is done by the robot. Because explanation, when I'm teaching, right? I mean, all teachers really hope that the teacher can come and talk to themselves, assuming probably looking at the board, and the people will do the weightlifting, heavy lifting, the students, they have their own work, to figure out what it is that the student is. But really, teaching is about your minds. I need to make sure that whether or not what I'm saying is likely to be accessible. Okay. In this case, it's actually the robot is either simulating the search from the human's model towards its model, or it can go the opposite direction, where what is the maximum number of changes it can do to its model on this path, such that after that last blue thing, its plan is no longer out. The interesting thing is that sometimes if you give this explanation, there may be additional changes that will happen after which the explanation has to be retracted. That's why the MME turns out to be monotonic in the sense it actually takes into account all the conditions under which your plan will still be up. Okay. Again, there's a more technical description on this in the paper, but you can look at it. But I just wanted to mention that underneath what looks like a plausible account of explanation, there are technical problems that you can specify and solve. Now, one other thing is, how does the AI agent get the humans model? As I said, there are cases like that particular case where the robot was walking the robot was doing this search history scenario where they started with a shared model. So you have a starting point from which you kind of capture the data. But even if the robot doesn't know the model, it could potentially have an estimate of, maybe the human's MRH may be one of these 50 different things. And it has a distributional information about the human's model. In which case, it turns out that those of you who are from planning literature may have heard of this idea called conformant planning. How many of you heard of bomb in the toilet problem? He puts the bomb in the toilet. But anyway, so bomb in the toilet problem is that you go to your toilet, everybody likes it, and you're all too young, you never heard about this. So bomb in the toilet problem is you go to your toilet, there is a package which may or may not contain a bomb. If you touch it, the bomb, if it contains a bomb, it will go off. If you touch it, doesn't contain a bomb, it won't go off. But basically, you can't sense whether or not there is a bomb. It turns out that, as you all figured out, you can always flush everything down the toilet and you will be fine. So the question is, given that you can't tell whether or not there is a bomb in this package, can you survive? Yeah, flush everything. That's a conformant plan. Okay. Similarly, a conformant explanation is I don't know what your specific MRH is. Here is an explanation that will capture all possible contingencies of your different models. That's a conformant explanation. So we can, you can do that, basically by extending that case out of it. In other cases, the AI agent actually has to learn MRH. But when it has to learn MRH from the traces, as I mentioned, sometimes you can actually compute the expectations. You do have to realize that it's a costlier problem. It's not just watching humans and figuring out what they're doing. If you watch and figure out what they're doing, you get image. You have to watch humans watching robots and figuring out do they like what they see. That's a harder data to get. If you get this, then you will get the human expectations, and you can then get MRH from that. And that's basically how we do model-free explicability and model-free explanations. And then sometimes, so it turns out that, as I said, the model-free explainability, model-free explanation essentially kind of capture the human expectations from a large-scale data and gather that, and from that, essentially, without having to have an explicit MRH, they can still compute the explanation as well as okay? So that's possible. I should mention that I'm talking about humans. I'm an engineer. I said engineers, we are going to be humans. So how do I know what humans want? If you come up with any kind of human AI interaction, you haven't heard about ERB, you are faking it. Okay, so you need to have systematic human subject studies, and it turns out that all sorts of rules, you can't poke humans and all that stuff. And so you actually have to do careful understanding of how to do human studies. And obviously, people like you really know everything about it. Lots and lots of people in computer science haven't heard of what IR is. Okay, so we do this, these kinds of studies. So, for example, there is a paper in HRI a couple of years back that shows that model-based, model reconciliation explanations actually do help humans in a human robot scenario. And we do that in a kind of a, again, as any of you have done human subject experiments would know, it's actually very hard to design these things. And so in fact, it turns out, and so if you thought it was hard, it's not just you. And so it turns out that they had to kind of come up with a gamified scenario where people are actually interested enough to show their true likes and dislikes. You have to incentivize them. And so people like points, people like money. So we give them points, we give money, and then basically see whether or not the kind of explanation that they're giving wind up helping their problems. Okay, so that's that kind of thing that we do, human factor evaluation. So this I probably won't have too much time. I just want to mention that the big picture that you should get from this part of the talk is that imagine that there is this sort of a loop going on. There is a homeostatic loop where upfront, the robot starts with some expectation MRH, and it can either follow that model, which will be explainability, which will be legibility, which will be explainability and predictability, or it can communicate changes in the model, which will be explanation, which also is actually connected to things like legibility. And then this loop continues, and one of the interesting things is, in a longitudinal scenario, what is surprising in the beginning becomes expectation later. When I came to US, at first I was walking on the left-hand side, like all civilized people do. And it turned out that other people were walking on the right-hand side, and their right-hand side. And so we basically bumped into each other. We said, Rav is kind of crazy. Let's just be like Rav this time onwards. And they started walking on left-hand side. At which point, Rav, being a smart guy, realized I should walk on the right-hand side. And so I started walking on the right-hand side. We continued walking. See what I'm saying? Basically, when we are reconciling each other's models, there would potentially be some amount of this staff oscillation that goes on. That's not surprising. Okay. And in fact, longitudinal interactions are the more interesting things. One of, you can talk about, surprise, etc. But longitudinal interactions, what was surprising in the first time becomes more. And then when you actually start doing the unsurprising thing, it becomes surprising. And then one other thing that, again, I don't have too much time to talk about, obviously, is it turns out we can actually say a lot of things about the connection between this sort of account of explanations and how humans exchange explanations. And there's a talk on my talks page on blind men and an explanation that I would suggest you look at, which basically looks into what are the psychological studies saying about how humans provide explanations to each other and how what we are doing is actually consistent. There are tons and tons of extensions there, but one thing I want to mention is longitudinal interaction ultimately will have notions of trust built in. Oftentimes, we make our lives simple by not monitoring other people because we trust them. And if you trust them, then you don't need to worry about whether or not what they're doing is correct with respect to the model you have in mind. So one of the interesting things, in fact, in the paper HRI that's coming out this year, one of my students basically, what we do there is the robot originally is explicable to increase the level of trust that a human has. To the point that the human thinks the robot is doing what I'm expected to do, I'll do something else. And then it can actually do what is optimal to do. Now, of course, I'm designing the robots, I'm not asking it to shoot people or anything. So, but the point is, in general, mental modeling opens the possibility of deception. There is no way of getting away from it. Every interesting aspect of intelligence has plus points and minus points. You don't get just the plus points and nothing else. So you can't actually collaborate with each other without modeling each other's minds. But the moment you model each other's minds, as I said in the very beginning of the talk, you can lie. And surprisingly, we actually even looked at what happens if machines lie, and and we did a paper on that in the ideas that some of you might be used. Anyway, so there's a book on that, pages. But I want to kind of give you a very quick overview during that, obviously, time. On the second part, which is a lot more newer, and there are papers, some recent couple of years, this year, last year. So if you have vocabulary mismatch, agent is basically everything remains the same. It's just that the robot's model is not in any symbolic terms at all. It's not that it's actions with precondition set. It's like two humans speaking two human languages translating to each other versus a human and a machine. Basically, most AI systems which are learning models from pixel spaces are Martians. You are trying to make sense of whether or not they're looking at the world the same way you would. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are. My point is that in general, explanations in the absence of shared vocabulary has become equated to saliency maps. Civilization is wasted on people who think saliency maps is the way people provide explanations. Okay, because imagine what happens if I have to provide an explanation as to why I did the zoom, why I came physically as I was giving a zoom cut. I have to give you a video of my life and say, in this video, notice these pieces, my friend, these are the saliency regions of my life video. Are you bored yet? You understand what I'm saying? This is why we invented language. Because we can't actually talk about these things, it's easy to do one picture that both of us are seeing and say, look, this is in here, this is their nose. What am I going to show you when I said in a sequential decision why I made a button? In general, we do symbolic. There is no way of getting around providing some abstractions over these, what I would like to call not videos, but space-time signal tubes. And if you are doing saliency regions on space-time signals tubes is a sucker's business. That's why nobody does it. So anybody who is talking a lot about explainable AI tend to look at a single substrate that the human and machine are sharing, typically like a picture. Okay, so pointing explanations are actually hard to comprehend, and hard to give and hard to comprehend. Because if I give you like an entire video and say these are all the pieces that will explain to you why I did this decision, you say, I'm sorry I asked an explanation. And never again ask it. Okay. So in general, humans developed a shared symbolic vocabulary and exchange symbolic explanations where possible and come down to pointing explanations only when the vocabulary is inadequate. It's like you're going back to cave people time when you don't have a way of explaining why you do something. Then you tend to invent words that would then again become shorthand. And my point basically is AI systems, when they are working with humans, should also be explainable in this sense. Even if they are doing their reasoning in the pixel space, they should be able to convert the explanation. When I ask for explanation, they should be able to convert it to symbolic. I do want to mention, running out of time almost, that neurosymbolic is a word that all of you heard. And it's like the most bandied about word. Next one is probably suitable. But I want you to realize that there are two different ways of looking at it. One type of neurosymbolic reasoning is that machines must think internally only in symbolic terms. Okay, and otherwise they would never get to human level intelligence. First of all, I don't know whether that's true or not. It's certainly not even true of humans because I don't know how I think. Okay, but the second is, irrespective of how you think, unless Elon Musk is given free rein to put random neural stuff in my head, you still need to talk to me as to why you did what you did when I asked. That essentially is explanations have to be symbolic, even if your internal reasoning is not symbolic. You understand what I'm saying? So we actually allow machines to do whatever what kind of reasoning they want, but we want them to have a symbolic persona. They want to have a symbolic API. Okay, and that symbolic API will be used for generating explanations. For example, in an iPlayer paper that you can look up that came out this year, in the context of the Montezuma range, right? Basically, the machine actually does its reasoning in the RAM space, not pixel space, but RAM space, which makes no sense to humans. Okay, but the humans think, why do you do this action? But they think in terms of, ladders need to be lifted, or particular actions will have particular preconditions. And so when they ask a file-based question, the machine has to provide an explanation in terms of the preconditions and effects. That symbols that it shares with the human. Okay. And so that requires locally constructing post facto a symbolic model piece around the decision that you have made. So, and it turns out it's actually doable. You basically know that the action that they're suggesting you do would not work because your simulator tells you so. But then you can figure out how to express that by sampling around that action and seeing in the sample trajectories, in which trajectories is the work actually working, which is not working, and seeing in which trajectories what symbols are actually present. When I say symbols, symbols have a grounding. Okay, so basically you're learning some kind of a classifier to ground that symbol, and then you're trying to convert what you did in terms of this. Okay, it turns out that when you do this kind of a change of your reasoning from internal representation to an external representation, there may be confidence issues. There may well be that you are actually providing an explanation that's not exactly correct according to human reasoning, but it's the closest that you will understand, that the human will understand. At that point, it turns out that we actually keep track of the confidence of the explanations, and at some point of time when the confidence is too low, we can use that as the reason to expand the shared vocabulary. So we can actually work with the humans to increase the number of symbols on the shared, so that you can then start up that. So there are curves, and the other side of providing explanation is accepting advice, which humans provide. Humans should be providing advice in the terms that they want. And those of you who have advisors know this, that advisors provide advice on top. And you say, why are you writing my paper? It's much simpler, much more useful. And why am I supposed to operationalize your higher level advice? Because we have lives, we're not used to it. Right? So humans will provide advice at a level that you have to still operationalize into your internal level. And it turns out the unit spotlight paper last year, which sort of shows in a human in the loop reinforcement learning, if the human is providing whether or not a particular action that a machine did is right or wrong, they can also provide an explanation in terms of the parts of the image, the objects in the image that are relevant. And then the machine then converts that option, that input into pixel space. And then actually uses ideas like data augmentation. So for example, keep that object each here constant, Gaussian plot the rest of the image. Then you have many more examples which should potentially have the same actions to be correct. And then use that to increase the number of examples you can listen to. So that's the kind of idea that we can use. Most recently, and this was the last idea that I can get across, you could use this even for things that seem almost just tacit by definition. But as I said, even tacit as people try to use symbolic terms. When I'm walking, you say walk faster, walk slower, walk, that sort of symbolic terms. And so if instead of when you're trying to get references that people have about very tacit tasks such as gait, the usual thing that people are doing right now is to show two trajectory windows to unsuspecting, I guess, Kenyan $2 say our workers and saying, what do you like? Okay. That's a very costly thing to do, especially if you're talking about, it's not actually even clear how to show these trajectories for reasonable tasks other than simulated by middle locomotion tasks. What you would like to do is the human looks at one trajectory and says, okay, walk fast, walk slower. And I need to ground the meaning of faster and slower based on the prior training and use that to actually change my behavior. We do that. There is a paper actually just presented that in the neurons, human reinforcement learning thing, and this paper. Okay, so you could do that again using symbolic terms, even when you're providing advice about what looks like a pretty darned tacit knowledge. That's okay. Yeah, there are a bunch of other things related to advice taking that you have done. I unfortunately time. I do want to mention that just like that relative attributes thing, even when people are actually doing complete demonstrations, you still critique the demonstrations. Humans critique the demonstrations in terms of symbols. How many of you played drum shutters? The one where commanding. What are you doing? You're doing random dances and you're thinking it is like a this movie name. The reason other people are actually able to guess it is because they're trying to evaluate your crazy emotions in terms of shared vocabulary. You see what I'm saying? It turns out that if you have ambiguous demonstrations, then having a symbolic vocabulary can reduce the ambiguity. We have done some work on that. It turns out there are interesting challenges, of course, lots of interesting challenges in providing this kind of symbolic middle ground, including where does the shared vocabulary come from, how do you learn the grounding, when do you expand the concept set, some of which we already started doing work, some actually there are already existing institutions. If you think of something like scene graphs that many of you have heard of, what are scene graphs? Computers don't know what a chain is. Computers don't care what a chain is. It's just a bunch of pixels. The chain is something that you care about. So when I actually took a picture and labeled it in terms of a scene graph, I'm already giving a symbolic representation that has been trained on humans' understanding of it. That can then become part of how we learn missions. Okay, so unfortunately, quickly ended as you, but the summary basically I said is, in general, mental modeling is the important thing that you need in trying to work with other humans. So the machines have to work with us. I somehow think that if I'm an AI, I have hard enough time figuring out what the heck is going on in your heads. If now I have to also figure out what the heck is going on with every little AI program that I'm interacting with, my life hasn't become easier, it's become harder. Okay, so they should do the heavy lifting. They should come into our land rather than, and it's becoming that as they go on, it turns out we now can talk to computers in more or less natural language, we can talk to computers in more or less natural modality. We also want to have explanations for computers in the natural modality. Rather than we try to figure out, okay, I'll try to look at what happened in the 395th day as 800 trillion neurons activation to see why you get what you do. That's just, I hope you don't have to. Okay? So in general, you have to think in terms of mental models, and the machines have to assess mental models for the humans they're dealing with. It turns out that even if in fact both of them are symbolic, there are a large number of technical problems that overcome, we did a bunch of them. And then we also talked about the fact that if the machine doesn't actually have a symbolic model, we can still have a pretty good set of directions as to how to get it to give us explanations in terms we understand and take advice from us in terms we are building. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to bring up, and thank you again. Yeah, well, time for questions, but if somebody wants to leave for that, they can leave. Yes, Allah.
So you criticize scaling empty maps and images. It's not the explanation, but so yeah, silencing maps can be used for debugging or building a problem.
That's what I'm saying. So it's used not by the end user. Yes. Yeah.
What are your explanations?
What?
What are your explanations?
By the humans in the loop. When I explain why I did what my decision is, I'm actually they are happier that they understood, for example, why
and debugging.
No, I mean no, it's again, your guy is basically in your case, the designer of the system is trying to certify that the internals of the system are right. Whereas when I am talking to you, I don't get to actually do that. I just have to essentially ask you for an explanation and then see what to do with that. And when you provide that explanation, I don't get to lobotomize you. Whereas in the saliency maps, to some extent, essentially, you can even get to do that. You're essentially, there are people looking at activations to figure out why the system did what it did, which is a very reasonable thing. If I'm debugging a program, I will go through it line by line. But I don't debug people's heads. And there are also rules against it. So I will ask them and try to make sense of that. So it turns out that in the case of AI systems, the end users most of the time won't have the ability to go in and debug. They want to deal with them as if they're dealing with other humans, which is at least the idea. And in that case, the explanations are quite different.
So I see maps can be used by entities as well.
Yes, I'm telling you, what I'm saying is, I think we have friends. So I don't have friends. If you don't ask me, there's some cases.
I guess I'm just trying to understand what are explanations used for.
Yeah, actually, by the way, that talk that I mentioned, I can talk to you a lot more, but that talk actually tells you the many uses of the explanations, and we actually capture more of them than just the debugging of them. And there's nothing wrong with debugging. It's just that's the only thing salience and after most people. Yes.
The other piece of
Hey, Kiri, I recognize I was the kind of I just think I see this person, I know this person.
saying in that respect is that with this mental model capability, the system can decide when this explanation is needed. Very different from salience or other.
Exactly.
We extract it, but instead your robot can.
Basically, it's an agency. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It does basically. So one of the things actually that I didn't go into, there's like a million papers that were written on the first part, not million, hundreds of papers that were written on the first part, where you can provide explanations proactively, or you can provide explanations only when people ask you. No, the original paper was proactive explanations, where the machine realizes based on its assessment of a marriage that you will be surprised. And so it provides the explanation. More lazy, demand-driven fashion, which is actually, I think, what I would do is I'll see if you ask a question. In fact, this is what teachers do, right? You talk like this and say, any questions? And then say, it's fine, it's fine. So nobody ever has any questions, so you don't have to answer anything. So in some sense, that is like a lazy, demand-driven fashion. But that's more or less, file-based explanations are exactly. Yes, sir. That's good.
What do the explanations in the case of Montezuma's revenge look like?
Model what?
What do the explanations in the case of Montezuma's revenge look like?
It basically says things like the ladder cannot be shifted. The ladder is not available, or some object in the wrong place. That's basically what it says. It's not in terms of in terms of the object. Yes.
So what you're telling me is I need to go revise my proposals from 20 years ago
Uh-huh.
for building shared mental models.
Yes. Don't faculty people agree. Don't faculty people obviously are about this, but no question.
We're going to get them funded back.
Yeah.
Because nobody
Yes.
does it.
Yeah. I think basically, when I gave this version of this talk like many years back, 2018 when I gave the degree of research papers, I tried to talk about human AI, and the idea is that AI in general had an ambivalent attitude to humans. Like Lennon, they want to help humanity, it's the people they can't stand. Right? So they're much happier being on Mars than dealing with people. And they're surprised that people are afraid of, at least at that point of time, people are afraid of AI. It's because you actually want to make a human you want to understand. Again, as I said, I think basically, as you know, I work very classical.
Yep.
And I think human factors people have been saying that I think for a long time about how to deal with whether or not and hypothesis about how humans accept things and better. But computer science people don't think. Computer science people think humans will know humans. But yeah, I know. But I still consider you as a human factors, which is good, by the way. Can be found. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So part of this reconciliation that happens between humans is also when there's differences in the grounding itself, right? So to say you and I have a shared vocabulary is a stretch in general.
Yeah,
there's a lot of reconciliation.
Completely. So that's not hearing it. Completely. So first of all, sometimes we use lots of great examples of it. That people have used the same word. In fact, I keep thinking of this one tweet where this guy lived through his entire life thinking that a particular word meant something different. And then when he was like 37 years old, he realized what it actually means, and it didn't somehow stop him. Because people just feel that. So yeah, grounding is an issue. And in fact, sometimes reconciliation, in fact, the paper, the TPI paper actually has a paragraph saying reconciliation is not just model reconciliation, it's vocabulary reconciliation. What is vocabulary reconciliation? It's changing the grammar. Okay. Yes, please.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to ask, like, how you building this original shared model of like talking to each other. So like,
As I said, basically they already exist, right? I mean, so in our little experiments, we started by saying this is the shared vocabulary, and then the machine learns the counting. But as what is a scene graph? Scene graphs already exist. Scene graph analysis exists. Okay, because it's not that people don't really want humans at all. They want humans to use their system, right? And so they actually provide the information that's the relevance, and that's where the shared vocabulary exists. The more interesting part is when do you know that the vocabulary is not enough, and when do you know that the extra word has to come from the human versus they both have to develop a new word, a new vocabulary. Okay. All right, so let's thank Paul again.